Well, covering developments for us today is our foreign editor, Philip Tell. He's with me now. Philip, do you think these strikes we've witnessed today do mark a new phase of the war?
Well, this certainly marks the fight back by the Russians following the bombing of the Crimea bridge 48 hours ago. I think this was to be expected, that Russia wouldn't sit with its arms crossed and let Ukraine get away with this. We've seen a severe amount of attacks taking place over the past few hours. There have been 23 regions hit right across Ukraine. Lots of missiles, 83 missiles falling in the region of Zaporizhzhia alone. 43 of those were destroyed. That includes Iranian drones were also used. So there have been widespread attacks right across Ukraine. This is Russia saying that it's not going to just let Ukraine get away with what it's called terrorist activity. The number of times that Vladimir Putin has actually used that word in his latest address is quite significant. Now, if you look at the actual situation on the ground, Nadia, there are a couple of points that are quite obvious here. The first one is it doesn't change what is happening on the ground in eastern Ukraine. We have this advance by Ukrainian forces. Whether Vladimir Putin decides to strike in Ukraine across the country at different targets, a lot of them civilian targets, is one thing. But this is not a strategic military plan by him to try to take control of the war. This is more of an intimidation against the Ukrainian population and also against the West to try to bully them into not supplying more weapons to the Ukrainians, saying, well, look, this is just the first step. If you carry on and there are more attacks against Russian interests, this is going to get far worse for the Ukrainians. So think again before you send in more weapons. That, I don't think, is going to have any effect as far as the West is concerned and will probably fall on deaf ears.
But in terms of intimidation that you were just talking about there is this other concern, isn't there, about nuclear weapons. Vladimir Putin has threatened or at least alluded to the fact that Russia does have these weapons. Do you think that is rhetoric from him, or is that a real possibility now?
I honestly don't think it is at the moment. If you listen to the speech that Vladimir Putin just made a short while ago, this is the sign of a man who is increasingly isolated. He's heard what Joe Biden has said over the past week, talking about catastrophic consequences for Russia if it uses nuclear warheads or nuclear weapons or strategic nuclear weapons. The rhetoric coming out from Vladimir Putin is a harsh response is going to be given to the Ukrainians. There's no mention of nuclear weapons. And I think he knows that he can't overstep that line because that will lead to an immediate action by the United States and from elsewhere that could be much more detrimental to Russia than anything else. That's the first point. The second point is he's been given a sign by both China and Russia, with whom he would like to have strong relations, that it is going to be no nukes in this war. So he may boast about it or threaten to use them, but he knows at the end of the day he has more to lose by using nuclear weapons than he does in just threatening to use them. He may decide to move them around in Ukraine so they can be picked up on satellite images and worry the West. He may try to fire a nuclear weapon into the sea as a test mission to try to intimidate the West. But I think at the moment it's still pretty hard to see that Vladimir Putin is going to actually push the nuclear button to send those nuclear weapons into Ukraine. I might be wrong, but I think that seems to be the reading for the moment from Moscow and from analysts who are looking at the situation there.
And also today, at the same time, Philip, we've got his Security Council, the Russian Security Council that is meeting, Vladimir Putin chairing that by video, and that coming as nuclear weapons or not. We do know that on the ground, Russia is losing ground to Ukraine.
Well, it's been a mess over the last few weeks. If you look at the fact that Russia has been losing vast swathes of territory that it conquered since the start of this special military operation back in February, the calamitous call-up campaign amongst Russian conscripts, which has gone really badly wrong with over 220,000, that's according to the European Union, fleeing over the border into other countries to get away from it, and those who are called up having to pay up to $1,000 to kit themselves out of their own pockets. This is all falling falling back onto Russian public opinion. So as I think many Russians believe that this was a war, a special military operation that really didn't have any effect on their daily lives, over the past few weeks they've now began to realise that this is a proper war and it is having an impact. And that stacked the pressure on Russia's leadership and on Vladimir Putin on one side. And then on the other side, you have the hawks in the Kremlin who are pressurising Vladimir Putin by saying, you're not doing enough, you're not going far enough, you're not winning this war. We have to go further, we have to be more aggressive. So I think Vladimir Putin, if you look at the images of him, you see a man who looks pretty tired and sitting all on his own, isolated, making these comments about the fact that there will be more attacks against Ukraine. But this is not helping the general effort of Russia trying to conquer Ukrainian territory. And that is the make or break thing of this war, that if Russia can't militarily take control of Ukraine, it can carry on bombarding areas of the country, but it's still not going to win the war in the long term.
Philip Tell, thank you very much indeed for your analysis.